मैम का चौथे दिन के प्रोग्राम में स्वागत करता हूँ और मैम अब प्रोग्राम शुरू करेंगी। थैंक यू।
नमस्कार। आज चौथा दिन है और मैं ये चाहती हूँ कि कल जो चर्चा हुआ आज भी हो, कि मतलब हमने ये बात की कि अनुवाद क्या है, इसका मतलब क्या है, साहित्य और अनुवाद में क्या संबंध होता है, और I will switch to English. So today I'm going to talk about Hindi, but I'm not talking about the history of translation in Hindi. I would like to raise some questions and some points about what it means translating from into Hindi in a multilingual context that is not only India, it's multilingualism in the sense also of like a global context. And so I will try to talk about what I was telling to you yesterday about the notion of literary geographies, the idea of looking at what we think of literary geography, of the literary field. We have some maps in our mind, but maybe we should change our way of thinking. So I am going to give you an example about translation in the literary field, and I will take the example of Premchand as translator. And he was translating from French, French literature. So why this is important in the context of literary Hindi, of what it means to translate French literature, what it meant to translate French literature at that time for a person like Premchand. And if we have time, but I don't know, because maybe if it's too late, we can just skip it. I would also add something that regards the notion of Chayanuvad, that it's another word that comes when we talk about Anuvad, Chayanuvad, in the context of Europe and India, and I would like to take a case study about that, but I don't know if we have time. So if we don't have time, we will do it some other day. So I will try to start with the notion of multilingualism, and I would like to start with this. I'm old enough to, in 2012, I remember that I came to India.
Your voice, I am singing song, soup song, flop song.
I'm not playing the whole song, but moon color white, and then everybody was crazy about this Kolaveri, and in Varanasi, but everybody was just talking about this Kolaveri, and I mean, so this is the Hindi heart, and there's this Tamil thing that goes around and gets like viral. And at that time, there was another thing that I want to show you, and it's an ad that was, I don't remember, it was, a phone company.
नौकरी लग गई सबकी। कोलकाता जा रहा है मराठी, केरला जा रही है बंगाली, मलयाली हरियाणा, और हरियाणवी जा रहा है मुंबई। अब भाषा नहीं आती तो कैसे चलेगा, है ना? आइडिया
यहाँ से कैसे निकलूं? हेलो, मराठी में टॉयलेट जाना है वो? जोराची लागली भाऊ, सुलभगे. जोराची लागली भाऊ, सुलभगे. सुलभगे. एक काम किया जाता है. ठीक है. सर, महाराष्ट्र की तरफ. वो मलयाली रेडी है. हाँ भाई. You want drink? Malayalam. Bornand Proto Cafeteria. Bornand Proto Cafeteria. Wow. हेलो मनाली, थोड़ा सीट नहीं दे रहा है. गाना गाना. तो बच्चे ना.
Okay, I'm just cutting this too, just to show you how, okay, there is multilingualism, but there is also a lot of monolingualism in a way, because, you know, it is not true that everybody can travel in India, and because everybody is bi or multilingual, it's so easy to do things. I mean, at that time, I remember that this ad was like, for me, it was really like showing that, okay, so there is this myth of, which is not a myth, but I mean, it's like, you know, everybody is like boasting multilingualism, but there are different shades of multilingualism. And so, what I want to talk about is the notion of multilingual local. Because we live in a global world, and we have spoken about the hegemony of English. But what does it mean to be a local cosmopolitan? That is, to have competencies and skills in some languages that allow you to get into, for example, some literary fields, but maybe you are not considered the center, you are not considered, you know, the important thing. And Francesca Orsini, in her book that I'm sorry, I'm always quoting it, but I think it's really a must, so you should really read it, East of Delhi. She's really like analyzing the fact of, you know, being positioned, being situated in a peripheral, in a different center, which is like a different kind of local. But, you know, this doesn't mean that these people were not aware of what was going on at the upper level. But what was going on in the upper level of, you know, like literature, language, and so on, was the process of standardizing. For example, we are talking about the second part of the 18th century, of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. There is the process of standardization of Hindi, creation of Shuddh Hindi. You know, it's something that is recent. But a lot of people, I mean, I'm just skipping all this. A lot of people were like, you know, following this trend, but then they would also follow their own taste. And their own taste, maybe, when there was like a prescription of like Kari Boli should become the only accepted form of Hindi, there were a lot of people, think of Bhartendu, I mean, writing in Braj, or, you know, even if you go to Lucknow, there were people like using different kinds of languages. Urdu and Hindi were not so divided as the narrative that we have about Hindi and Urdu wants us to believe. So in a way, we have to be aware of, you know, what Francesca says, significant geographies. And she says those cities in the putative centers of the world literary map, Banaras, Varanasi, Allahabad, and so on, they may appear implicitly endowed with a better or wider field of vision, as if they were standing on a hill. They have a sort of God vision of what is going on. But in fact, their view and their literary taste is as located and partial as that of others elsewhere, often more partial because less curious, less aware of its own biases and limitations. So this is what I find sometimes in the narrative about Hindi. The standardization of Hindi happened with this kind of view that some people had this idea that we have the prerogative of seeing from above. So we know. and everything else is lower. So we were discussing this about English, but as you can see, this kind of, and we will talk about that, the power relation and so on, it's everywhere. And even in this multilingual context, it had some effects because the notion of location is, of course, a location in time and place, but it is also an intellectual and political perspective. So we have to keep in mind that the canon of Hindi literature, the grammar, the standardization of Shuddh Hindi happened in a certain place, in a certain time. It was done by certain people who, had the notion that they were on top. And so apparently they were less biased than others, but our task is to see how this is not probably the only way, of telling this story. And I'm always talking about literature because this is my field and it's what I know better, and because, talking about literary translation is something that probably a lot of people can, discuss even, without having to go into technicalities, because I think Premchand probably is a name that most of you have heard, So we have the historiographical narrative about what happened, and the literary historiography. Literary historiography means our beloved Ramchandra Shukla. He was, the father of the standardization of literature. He was the one who really created the history of Hindi literature. According to this story, according to this narrative, what happened in the turn, from pre-colonial to colonial culture was a complete epistemic shift. It means that, the way people were considering knowledge was really like broken. There was a change, a break. And what happened then was that the colonial hegemony was established, the cultural hegemony of English was established, and India became subordinated to the center. And literary modernity, when we speak about, modern Hindi literature, modern Gujarati literature, the modern, Adunik. So this was a process of imitation. It was like, trying to assimilate some models that would allow us subaltern people to enter modernity. This is the narrative we got. I don't know if you have alternative narratives, but the narrative of most, histories of literatures in modern Indian languages follow this kind of narration. But if we look at historiography, what happens is a very different thing, and I'm talking about historians, when they tell us the story of what happened with the colonial arrival, the impact, the colonial takeover, it was not such a rigid thing, that it was not like a break. It happened slowly, it was gradual, and local groups, local individuals played a big and important role and dynamic role in this process. So the colonial modernity is not this epistemic break, and what local from this local point of view, I'm just telling you, we try to go into these local geographies, and having these different kind of relations, we can see that okay, there is of course the East India Company, but there are some voids, some places where between collaborating and just fighting, there is always it's the in between, what Homi Bhabha would call the in between, the hybridity, and this is where people can take advantage of this interstice, you know, and try to do alternative things. And what Francesca is doing in her book is really to study this thing. For example, if we think of the Bengali Renaissance, I also quoted it yesterday. I think there was something like that, the same quotation. I mean, Calcutta was the center where the East India Company was powerful, and then we have the Babus, who are like, you know, anglicized people. But if we just go a little bit, you know, close to Bengal, like we go to Lucknow, and we see that, for example, there is the narrative is that there was a delay, you know, that was the first thing and the others were delayed. It's like, you know, Cecil Kumar Das uses this word, you know, which means that it's like, you know, oh, they were good because they could do it, and the others were like, it was like a race, you know, they were like trying to catch up. But these are questions that I'm giving to you, and I'm giving some references of books that, I mean, they have been very, very important, you know, because the idea that English education was really a mask of conquest. And is it really true that all Indian writers were crushed by English literature? So this hegemony, did it really mean that at a local level there was nothing going on, that everybody was like, and what Ganesh Devi says, you know, that they forgot intellectual and aesthetic traditions that have been there for a long time. Is it really the case? What Francesca argues is that in reality, there was this like co-creation of something, and the shifts, of course, some of them were very strong, but some were like more subtle. And what is important is that in this process, because of the idea, you know, that there is the modern standard language, let's talk of the modern standard Hindi, what happens is that there is this, the history of Hindi and Urdu, as I mean, has been told to us for a long time, but there is also something else. And this is what has not been investigated very much. The fact that even if there was this prevalent discourse about Hindi Kari Boli having to become the Rashtra Bhasha and so on, but at, you know, the personal level, people were continuing to practice something about language and literature that was not really what was taught at the official level. Official, I mean, I'm using the word official, but it's not good because there was no officiality in that, you know, but it was like, let's say, the prevalent discourse. And, for example, Hindi and Urdu continued to be mixed, and they are still being used in a mixed way, even if there is Shuddh Hindi, and there is, but people, I mean, we were told that, you know, if we translate in Shuddh Hindi, then nobody will read this text, you know, and you know, especially in certain areas like satire, theater, parody, and so on, we can see that this goes on in a very creative way. But as you see, these are, like satire and parody, are the parts that have not been included in the canon of Hindi literature. I mean, they're not considered good literature. It's not high literature. It's like a second part of it. Harishankar Persai was not really very valued for a long time, and I think he was really a very good writer. I mean, his style is excellent, but he's only writing this, let's say, lower kind of texts. And so, of course, we have hierarchies of language, and we have, you know, the creation of Kariboli Hindi in a standardized uh, form, and this, of course, had a strong impact in the creation of the curriculum. So even in schools, of course, kids are taught in a certain way. But we can see that, I mean, for example, in the translation from English to Hindi, if we think of the first experiments in, you know, imitations of poetry, like the famous translation by Sridhar Pathak, of course, it was a model to be imitated, but it was, like, you know, done So I'm just going very quick because, you know, the education, of course, we are talking about the importance of school. School is important. But I want to stress another aspect. That is what is very important. Maybe nowadays, I don't know, but it was important when I first came to India. I remember that I met so many people that they went to school, they studied to become engineer or whatever, because, you know, now this is what youngsters have to do. But then they would keep on studying Sanskrit at home, or music at home, or Bengali at home if they are like in Delhi and they're going to the English school, but still they're learning their private, let's say uh, their what was told the Matrabhasha, or the classical languages like Persian and Sanskrit. And they were taught, maybe not in schools so much, because the curriculum was modeled to the English one, but this informal education continued. And maybe you can think of what is going on now in non-resident Indians who live maybe in Canada or USA or Italy, you know. Their children go, for example, to Italian schools, but on Saturday and Sunday, they have, most of the people who live in Italy and they're of Indian origins are from Punjab. So they study Punjabi, and there is like the local Gurdwara, and they go there and they have religious instruction, and they have like a sort of religious and literary instruction, you know, some sort of, you know, also language instruction in Punjabi, which is something that they don't use it in the school. So this, both levels, so formal and informal education, it was there at that time. It continues to be an issue that I think we should take into account. And yeah, that's why I put the example of Bhartendu. Bhartendu, he was not a well-educated man. I think he didn't go to school very much. I mean, he described himself as a Bahushrut, which means that he was not very happy with Likhna, but Bahushrut is somebody who listens a lot. It's not like a bookworm. But yet he had a huge knowledge of languages, because, you know, he could manage with Hindi, Braj Bhasha, Urdu, English. Even if, I mean, by today's standard, he was a dropout. So socially, today he would be described as a failure, because for us, I mean, a dropout is a failure. So. And think of the whole range of poetry that goes like parallel in Braj Bhasha and Urdu, and Kariboli is something that is inserted, but, you know, people follow their taste, and their taste makes these things go on, even if the hegemonic discourse is another one. So maybe we can think of what David Lelyveld describes as linguistic repertoire. When we think of monolinguism or multilingualism, maybe we could define it in a different way. David Lelyvel says that people did not have languages, they had linguistic repertoires that varied even within a single household, let alone the marketplace, school, temple, court, or devotional circles. And these codes of linguistic behavior took on the same characteristic of hierarchy that other sorts of human interaction did. So this is really interesting because you see, it's like saying, it's not only having, because if you think of multilingualism, it's like you have language A, language B, language C. But if you have this kind of what is a linguistic repertoire, you can have different competencies in the different languages and you use them in different contexts, according also to the social range that is given to these languages. And so that's why, you know, we can say that maybe this means that Indians are translated people, because when you keep on having this kind of switch, you are constantly translating yourself, you know, from one part of your linguistic repertoire to the other. You're using different languages. And I don't know if this is translation or not, but it is something that has to do also, you know, with using multiple languages and translating ideas, you know, from one to the other, from one register to the other, from one situation to the other. And that's why literary practices then required people to learn separate codes. Because, you know, in the formalized version, what happens is that what is so mixed in the daily interaction, in the informal interaction, it becomes something that creates a different dibba. So you have the dibba that is Hindi, the dibba that is Urdu, and you don't mix them any longer. But this is what you do continuously. And then this means that if we say that you don't have to translate when you use this mixed linguistic repertoire, but then this is what you start doing, the proper translation, I would define it like this, when you come to literature. And then because of other elements, of course, the rigid definition of languages and of literary canons happens, and this is what was told to us. So another element, we have already talked about that, is the script, because yesterday I was mentioning the fact that I remember, you know, when I was studying about the standardization of Hindi language, the only allowed script becomes Devanagari. But this was not the case. What about Kaiti? There are manuscripts in Kaiti script, and they are also, some of them contain some texts that are not only like, you know, something for merchants or something like that. It is like, or even literary things. So this is another example of, you know, what is the prevalent narrative, I mean, is probably to be discussed. But the result is that we have a single standard vernacular. And so in this, that we have described something like a multilinguistic scenario, now enters something that is very much monolinguistic. Because when we have a standardized kind of language, and then we say that everything has, for example, to be translated into that kind of language. So we are stressing something that is very much monolingual. And even in this aspect, something very interesting happens is that, you know, this language is defined as the Nij Bhasha and the Matra Bhasha. And this is very weird because, I mean, we know that in the official, in the literary level, the language that is spoken at home, I mean, nobody cared about that. It was not important at all. And now it becomes the tool in order to justify the rigid Hindi Kariboli standard language. So we have this standard vernaculars. Of course, print comes into the scene, and so even translations, if they are printed, the medium is also something. And there is a book by Gramling that is really very interesting, because he speaks about the invention of monolingualism. And he's not talking about India, he's talking about this process of, creating these rigid standard languages that are, connected to print. And he's talking about Europe and the Enlightenment. So, and I was talking about that when I mentioned to you Olga Tokarczuk's book, that Books of Jacob, that really, I mean, it is before the invention of monolingualism in Europe that is connected to the rigid idea of a nation state. I think what happens in India with this standardization of, let's say, regional languages, vernaculars, I never know how to define them. I don't know exactly, but Indian languages, modern Indian languages, they are standardized, and at the same time, this process creates a monolingualism in a culture that, I mean, used to be very different, but now, even now today, everybody boasts that we are multilingual. But if we look at what is taught, for example, in schools, what is taught, I mean, is only the standard language, and this is what is prescribed when you, for example, do a translation for the Sahitya Academy. You are not supposed. Navinji is not very happy with the language of Gitanjali. Why? Because she doesn't use the prescribed language. I'm sorry he left, but it is the right moment. Well, I didn't mean it, but I mean, of course, we can discuss it. Of course, Gitanjali is not using what is prescribed and what people like, because it is the language. But she's like, doing something weird. Sure, it's weird, but it's literature, so okay, as we told that people. But you can see that these are all processes, and they're not exclusively Indian or I think it's really something that has to do with this notion of languages being standardized, being inserted into a frame that is like printing and what we call modernity, the nation states, and this has to do also with this. So what does this have to do with translation? Well, it has a lot to do with translation.
The idea Stuart also talks about the idea of high grow, low grow, and the no grow. That's
yes. Because in this process, I will come to this very soon, but okay. This is where Lok Sahitya was invented because of that. Because when you have like a standardized Hindi, and you have and then these kind of like Lok Geets and so on, they cannot enter the canon unless you create a special part. But then the very moment you create the notion of Lok Geet, of Lok Sahitya, who was talking about that? Was that you that you were mentioning? The fact that somebody is describing something that is like a song, and yeah, I don't remember. Sorry, but and this is defined in a certain way, and then something changes. So you see, this is very relevant. But okay, we are not going into this thread. So the idea of vernacular language, vernacular literature translating into vernacular apparently is very democratic. Come on. Why should only the Pandits know? Why should only the people who know the higher languages know? We know, we use our language. So it is democratic, But, this effect, this side effect, I mean, it was really disruptive for people who lived, in this multilingual literary culture, multilingual persons, who had to negotiate in this thing. Because the idea that comes, from Herder, that one people, one language, one culture, one religion, one nation. If we accept this, then we have to say that we have one community, one language, and you are dividing communities, and or otherwise you are forcing somebody to accept the definition of community. Like, if the definition of nation is blah blah blah, blah, then you all have to accept it. So, yeah, it's homogenizing, and it creates some problems maybe to some people who say, well, why do I have to choose between Hindi and Urdu? I'm using both. My grandparents did it. My grandmother used to read only, recite only Braj poetry, and my, I don't know, auntie was only like, reciting Urdu shair. So why should I choose? Why? Well, this is what happened, and the territorialization of language, which means that, what happens in ordinary life has to be cancelled. It is still there, but it's not visible any longer. So you cannot erase it, because you see it's still going on, but you make it invisible. And then, the fact that in India there was not only multilingualism but also multi-scripturalism. It means that people could really use different scripts for the same text. This is also not allowed any longer. And of course, this leads to the creation of a higher vocabulary that is admitted in grammar, the Shuddh Hindi, and a lower vocabulary. And this brings us to the story that we know, Hindi and Urdu and so on. So this happens, 19th century, 20th century. And of course, this has a lot to do with what was going on at the time, because the story that has been told to us is that, there were people who chose Hindi, people who chose Urdu, and, this is the story of Hindi, this is the story of Urdu, and blah, 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 blah. But if we think of what was the idea of world literature at that time, we can see that probably the situation was a little bit different. If we look at periodicals, there was a lot of translation going on periodicals, because we don't have to think of translation as something that is like, Sahitya Academy commissioning the translation. It was like, people start their own journal, their own periodical, and they translate. And what we see is that, there is the model that, for example, Ibn Zohar has given to us, is that, there is always this English literature, the idea that everybody is trying to catch up. He's also saying that when there is a powerful language, all the less powerful languages try to catch up to that. But, for example, read East of Delhi, and you will find out that actually what was going on was different. It was not people trying to catch up to English, but they were trying to find their own place in a very fast changing world. And so they were like reading a lot, maybe through English. But this doesn't mean that they're using English was something that really meant they considered English higher. And we will come to this because we will see what Premchand was doing. And relay translation, which is like, you transfer from A to B and B to C. And so it's not like direct, it's indirect translation. And we spoke about the problems and all, the difficulties and the danger that it can do. But it can be also used for this purpose, you know, trying to, okay, English is what we are supposed to use. Good. We are translating from English into, for example, Hindi, Urdu, Malayalam, but we are choosing some things that are not what the top people want us to do. And this happens, of course, through what Francesca defines thin knowledge. What is the difference between thin knowledge and, you know, strong knowledge? You know, if you have thick knowledge, you know a lot. I mean, you have studied a lot. If you have thin knowledge, it's like, you know, maybe you have read 1 or 2 books by Austrian authors. You don't know everything about Austrian literature, but you have an idea. And this gives you a superficial familiarity with something, but it was like a key to open the world to people who maybe were only reading in Hindi. A lot of people were translating from English into Hindi things that were from other literatures, not English literature. Can you see the disruptive thing they are doing? Like, for example, you know, I put this idea of, you know, Austrian drama. Of course, I mean, this is something that was not very well known, but it was used because it was crucial in order to make people think about that. I can just, and you think, oh, well, you know, this was many years ago and these people were ignorant. They didn't have an idea of what the world is. Now we know it better, you know. And okay, this is something that happened in Turin 2 years ago. We had a fellow coming from Holland, from IIS. He's from India, from Delhi. He's an historian, and he came to Turin with this exchange. And of course, I'm coming from the periphery. I am one of these, you know, local places. I'm not in the center of the world. I'm not London. I'm not Paris. You know, I am Turin. Does anybody know here where Turin is? I don't know. Maybe you looked up in the map, but I am pretty sure that not many people know exactly where to put it in the map of Europe. Well, it's in Italy, okay, southern of Europe, but where? You don't know. I mean, Turin is nowhere to be seen. It's not on the map of the important academic world, even if it's an important university. But, you know, southern Europe for Indians does not exist, because Shoaib arrived and he spent a week with us. He had interaction with my colleagues, with the students. He gave talk, and then he left. He wrote a wonderful article on the IIAS newsletter. You can find it on the internet. And we were like, my God, what happened? He told us that he discovered a new world, you know, because the fact that there is an academia that is not English-centered, that even if they are trying to push us into, you know, like teaching in English, and I'm doing it now, of course, because this is the world we live in. But, I mean, the fact that there is something different, a different geography, you know what I mean? This is something that even today, for many, what is your geography of the academic world? It's America, maybe Canada, I don't know, and UK. But would you ever think of going to, I don't know, Poland? Why?
To some extent, maybe Singapore and China.
Okay. Yeah. I'm talking about Europe because we were discussing about the positioning of my, you know, university in that area. You know, we are nowhere to be seen.
Particularly in Indian context, there is a lot of exchange with, let's say, MUS and NTU.
Yes. Yeah. But that's why, you know, this what was happening at that time, it was really important. And we have some important I'm talking about, you know, periodicals, of course, that were really crucial. And so for Nehru, translation was something that had to be done in order to update Indian literature. We have to translate into Indian languages because we have to catch up with English. But what other people saw was using translation as a helpful tool in order to show Indian readers that what has been told to us, that English is excellent, it's the best, it's the only thing. Okay, this is not the case. And for example, the pioneer of world literature in Hindi is Padamlal Pannalal Bakshi, and he wrote a book called Vishwa Sahitya. And in this book, he really, I mean, he was acquainted with a lot of things, which was not, of course, through English translation, because they couldn't read all the languages. But, for example, okay, Dickens, of course, but also Honoré de Balzac, Alexandre Dumas, Gorky. And think of, Gorky in India is so famous. Why? I mean, because it was translated. And it comes from, this time. But who chose Gorky? Okay, we know that there had been the Soviet Union creation, and so it was something important. But, okay. And this happens also in Urdu, and this happens also in Malayalam. And, oh, sorry. I want to go now to my example, which is Premchand. I mean, I don't have to introduce Premchand. I think everybody knows. Yes, yeah, okay. So, Premchand says that, oh, I put this here, but I also have the original text here. I put it, I'm sorry, I have to set it better. It's here at the end. Here it is. No. Dun, dun, dun. I know I made it, so it must be some. Oh, here it is. So, this is with the Hindi text. If anybody wants to read it in Hindi, I'm only reading the English translation. And in my view, short stories of a higher quality are to be found in the French and Russian literature than in any other European language. In English, too, Dickens, Wells, Hardy, Kipling, Charles Young, and Bronte, and this is how it's written, have written short stories, but they cannot stand comparison with the creation of Gilles de Maupassant, Balzac, or Pierre Loti. French short stories are extremely delightful. Besides, Maupassant and Balzac have not let go of the idea or moral teaching behind storytelling. They always try and resolve some social or spiritual problem. So, what is Premchand telling his readers? He is telling, look, they have told us something, that English is the best, that the best literature is Shakespeare and English and so on. But I'm telling you that there are other literatures, and these are the best literatures. And how am I showing this to you? Through translation. So what does he do? I'm going back to this. Okay. He translates... Wait. He translates something, and it's interesting because it's a project that was commissioned by the Hindustani Academy. So he's using an institutional strong position because, it's something by the Hindustani Academy. And we said that, this institutionalization of translation is something important, So, and he translates something because that was selected by them, but then he also translates something else. So what is interesting is that, he translates Lessings Nathan der Weise. Is there anybody in German here? Or maybe at home? It's like a story where a father wants to test his sons, and so he creates 3 jewels that are the same, exactly the same, and he gives one to each son. So in the end, I mean, we will never be able. The parable is that, which one is the authentic one, which one is the real one. I know that this story is also in the Jew tradition. It's everywhere, you know. I mean, it's a very famous thing. But Nathan der Weise, I mean, it was like a very important mm, German drama. And the final, I mean, the most important part of this is when, you know, there is like the final, the moral of the story is that, and so the truth ring could not be determined, almost as indeterminable is for us our true faith, the true faith. And he translates, you know, we have the Hindi and the Urdu translation. And we can see that in both translation, we have very, very little slippages. And if we don't look at the slippage between asal and asli, we can see that there are only slight changes, variations in, like, to use prakar and tareh, to use sameh and bakt. And what is more important for me is that in these renderings, the Persian constructions are in both places. So we see that this idea, you know, of dividing Hindi and Urdu is not really used very much. So what happens though is that, of course, the style is changed, and I mean, he chooses a very easily understandable prose. Premchand's idea is to use translation in order to undermine colonial power. And this is very clear in his translation of a French drama that is Thais by Anatole France. And this, of course, happens via an English translation. But the English translation, we can see that, you know, I mean, there were not many addings. I mean, it respects, you know, the structure of the first thing. The ideological reasons that he states in his introduction to the translation is that he wants to liberate Hindi and Indian literature from the tutelage of imperially inducted master literature, English. So here translation is really like a weapon, you know, it's something that you use to fight colonialism. And he's not the first one, you know, there were many other translations, not of Thais, but of, you know, other dramas and so on. But, you know, in Europe at that time, we know that another important person is present from India through translation, because okay, we are discussing about the fact that Gitanjali got the prize for her translation, but what about the Nobel for Tagore? Why is nobody, I mean, surprised or, you know, criticizing the fact that the Nobel Prize was not given to the Bengali poems of Tagore, but to, okay, his own, whatever, but it was the English translation. Nobody is talking about that. So, okay, I'm not trying to, you know, defend, but I'm just, you know, pointing it out. So what is the fuss? Okay, now, okay, translations get prizes. Okay. That was a translation that became an original text, but everybody knows it was a translation. And it was not a translation, it was done by himself with a lot of English speaker friends, you know. Yeats was there very much. So, I mean, but why do we ignore this thing for Tagore and we are doing it now for something that is happening now? Does anybody has an idea? I don't know. I don't have an answer, you know. I'm just, you know, seeing things. And I think, okay, so if giving prizes to translation is a problem, it's always been there. We have somebody very famous, very representative of India who got a Nobel Prize. He is Bengali, of course, but I mean, but this fact, you know, brought the Indian poetry to the international scene. And that's exactly what I was telling you yesterday. So what is the difference between these two processes? Why one is acceptable and the other is not? Think about that. Because it's very complicated, because as you see, you know, it's easy to say, oh, we should only give prizes to the original work. We should not rely on translation in order to get recognition. But what if this is something that happens and has happened for a long time? Maybe now it's more visible. It is like, you know, something that it's more at a global level. Yeah, you wanted to say something?
Local, I'll just give an example of a Russian work by Rasul Hamzatov. And I don't remember the Russian title, but it's called Mera Dagestan. And it's very popular in Punjabi circles. If you go to any Punjabi department, they will recommend you two books. One is Mera Pind and one is Mera Dagestan by Rasul Hamzatov, who is a Russian writer. And their book, getting translated in Punjabi, gained such currency that it never gained in Russia. You will not find this book in a curriculum of any Russian university.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe what we should do is just to, you know, that's why I tell you, let's go to the local scene and try to understand what is understanding there. And of course, we have to generalize, but it's too easy to say, okay, this is not to be done, that is not to be done, this is good, this is bad. I don't think this sort of judgment is useful. If we want to have a critical approach, we should just, you know, try to find out how these different processes appear and why they happen in a certain way. What is the meaning? What is maybe why are they useful for some people? Why are they not useful for some other, you know? So anyway, Premchand, in his introduction to his translation, says, we have translated this book for the sole reason that it appeared to us to be excellent in every aspect. And we do not hesitate to say that we have not seen a better literary work in English. It's like, you know, come on, it's not like saying it once. He's repeating it. He's making a point. And as I told you, the paratext is very important in translation. It's not only the choice of words. The translator here, you can see that here the translator, of course, he is Premchand, so I mean, he can do it. But anyway, he's becoming very, very visible. He is making his point. He's not hiding. He's not trying to say, okay. And he says that in Europe, the delightful literature of France is the best of all. And he was not a specialist in French literature, but probably the reading that he did made him think that these texts were useful to make his point. And he's translating something. It's also interesting that he uses the word saras, where he's like, you know, how he translates this delightful, you know, he uses saras, which is like putting the word ras, which, I mean, is very important for people who are like in literary studies and so on. I mean, it would be like a catchword for the readers. So here we have the book, and here we have like the French edition, the Hindi edition, and the English translation. The choice is about the story of a saint, a female saint, Sahay, who lived in the 4th century, and she was a repentant courtesan. So she was like, you know, a very sort of anarkali. No, not anarkali. Sorry.
Much like his own character in Seva Sadhana.
Yes, yes. So, and he likes this story because it is for him very much linked to Indian values. And he, for example, says that Thais is a blending of Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. This he says in the preface, in the introduction. And am I supposed? Okay. Do I have some more time? Yeah, half an hour, 20 minutes, and then okay, maybe 15 minutes. I will try to make it very short. So the title he chooses is different. It's not Thais. It's not the name of the heroine. Actually, he changes the name of the characters. So and he calls it ahankar, because what he's stressing is the notion of egoism, of egotism, which is not referred to the female character, which is Thais herself, but to the male character of the story. So he has always claimed that translation should be very careful, but the choices that he makes are a little bit different. And in his translation, he introduces, for example, the notion of Maya. He says that we find this tale that is important because this Rishi, the story, is a very selfish Rishi who convinces this courtesan to leave the sinful life she lives and to become a saint, but then he himself, is proud of his own asceticism. And then Lord Vishnu weaves webs of Maya around him, and the Rishi soon comes to his senses. So you see, he's Indianizing, he's domesticating this thing. And as I told you, he shifts the focus and he erases all the sensual aspects. And in French, for example, the Thais had even been accused of being a pornographic tale. But what he does, he makes it very spiritual. And here, if I think of making something more spiritual, the first thing that you think about India, what is it? I mean, the process of spiritualizing India. What do you refer it to? Would you refer it to any kind of situation? The thing that India is spiritual and everybody is like yoga, everybody wakes up in the morning, yoga, thinking only of, moksha, and, everybody is spiritual in India. What kind of idea is this?
This is also a kind of Orientalism.
It's Orientalism. But I want to show you that, okay, we could think of this as a sort of Orientalism, but maybe Premchand was aiming at something more complicated, because yes, he Indianizes the story a lot. So I just give you an example. The name of the hero is Paphnouche, actually in French, Paphnousius in English, and he makes it into Papnashi. So Papnashi is the destroyer of sin, and he does it very often with a lot of names. And when you study translation, you are always told that you should not change proper names. So maybe this is something that was not. But he also stresses the fact that some aspects of the story, like for example, there is when Paphnous he is like in meditation, and he's distracted by the beauty of nature. Here Premchand in his translation adds a note, in the translation adds a sentence that is, on the contrary, Indian sages and great men were given to taking delight in the beauty of nature, while while the French person doesn't want, sorry, I just mixed it up, doesn't want to be like to be immersed in the nature. So there is not this holistic approach. And also, for example, he calls the ascetic person a yogi, and he calls him, like when in French we have le gymnosophiste, he uses the word yogi, and he also explains to us that indeed sometimes have because in the French we have people who can meditate for 1 year and even 20, 30 or 40 years, and he adds that in India even longer than that, you know, so even 100 years. So it's like, you know, stressing that Indians do it better. And so shall we call it Orientalism or exoticism? Yes, we can, but we can see that, for example, because Prem Chand, for example, maintains some exotic and Orientalist statesmen. Even in one time he corrects it when people, Indian people, are described as people with yellow skin, avec le peu jaune. He says no, it's not yellow skin people. These are, you know, other people. It's samba le ranze. So, but this is something that I just wanted to skip this and go to. There was an okay here. The fact of, you know, adding all these things could be also a way that like a strategy that Prem Chand is using in order to make this what he is presenting to us more suitable to his readership, which is a new readership, because the Hindi Urdu readership is not, I mean, we are talking about this Hindi that is being standardized, and we know that it was not like a large readership. So we had to attract people. So he's trying to domesticate, okay. He's trying to Indianize, okay. Sometimes he's also, you know, stressing it in a way that could be like accepting the Orientalist view of India. But we know that, you know, for these people, maybe this was also something that was like praising the superiority of India. So it could be also a way of stressing that India is like more important. So let's say a cultural nationalistic resistance. As I told you, you know, he's resisting to the hegemonic language, and he's also trying to show that our culture is important.
Similar pattern can also be found in, let's say, Henry Garosio or Michael Madhusudan,
Yes,
who followed the modern sort of models, but still sort of tried to implant the Indian, so-called Indianness into those.
yeah. This is not in creative fiction. It's not creative writing. It's in translation. So this is what I wanted to show, you know, that sometimes in Hindi, in the Hindi field, translation has also been used in this way. So, okay, maybe can I use five minutes? Okay, just to finish this is that, you know, Premchand was not the only one to be fascinated with French literature. This went on. I don't know if you are familiar with Chitralekha by Bhagwati Charan Verma. This is another story. Yeah, but I wanted to also to give space to questions, you know. So, and this is like a creative writing, text of creative writing. It's a novel, but it's inspired by the story of Thais that Bhagwati Charan Verma knew through Premchand. So, and this is another thing. It's what I wanted to say. If we have 5 minutes to see what happens to texts when they travel and they are translated, and then like Bhagwati Charan Verma, he wrote something that was maybe, you know, not a translation, but a creative work inspired by a translation. And this is constantly happening also in Hindi. When I was coming here, yeah, okay, my idea is to take you to a journey, and I want you to tell me what is the sambandh, what is the relation between Romeo and Juliet, Czech literature, Nirmal Verma, and Hindi language in Assam. Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about that, because when I was coming here, unfortunately, I came when the book fair, the Delhi book fair, were just finished. But I just noticed this. There was an event about this book, Romeo and Juliet or Andera, by Kunal Singh. And I happen to know this text because I wrote something about this book a few years ago. And I thought, oh, look at this. This is interesting because the story of this book, you know, this is like a fiction. But if you look at the title, I mean, it's exactly the same title that was just, you know, given to us by your colleague. So I thought, okay, this is a good example to talk about this idea of Anuvad and Chayanuvad. So what do we mean by Anuvad and Chayanuvad? Chayanuvad is a special type of Anuvad that is like a shade, a shadow translation. But it means that you are referring to a text, but you are creating something totally different. You take the story to a different place, you change everything. But it's still the same thing, you know? So, and there is a reference to that.
The example would be Pride and Prejudice, and would be from Aishwarya Rai's Tarar film that was made in India.
Yeah, but that is also like a transsemiotic translation. Here it's only with books.
That
You know,
would be
so it's
transmedial.
yeah, but so it's transmedial and transsemiotic, but it's also like Chayanuvad because you create a new story. You put it like, instead of putting in a certain time, you put it in the modern age. I mean, this is something that has. But even if you think of Porgy and Bess, it's Romeo and Juliet, but it's not Romeo and Juliet, of course. But everybody sees that it's Romeo and Juliet, you know. So, okay, so Jano Cenasiek, apart from what's your name? Oh, apart from Deepak, is anybody else who knows about Jano Cenasiek? Nahi. My pronunciation of Czech is very bad, but at that time there was not the Czech Republic, there was the Czechoslovak. So it was the Soviet time, you know. So he was a Czechoslovak writer and screenwriter, and he wrote Romeo and Juliet and The Darkness. You can see it here, Romeo, Julie, Atma. And this was very famous. It was translated in many languages. There is also an Italian translation. Actually, I could only read the Italian translation. It was made into a film, more than one film. It was made into an opera. I mean, it's not a minor text. And of course, apart from Romeo and Juliet in the title, we have also another thing that tells us that it's referring to Shakespeare, because it opens up with this quotation from Shakespeare, which is taken from the most excellent and lamentable tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. So, I mean, it's really Shakespeare. So there is no doubt. Okay, Shakespeare is there. This is the Italian translation that I read just to. But then we have Nirmal Verma. Nirmal Verma, I think you probably know, he's one of the most important writers in Hindi literature in the 20th century. He spent many years in Czechoslovakia. He learned the language and he translated from Czech into English, into Hindi. Actually, he was invited by the Czech government for a translation project. So, I mean, it's very much about translation. So he translated this in 1964, and he translated also other very important Czech writers. He stayed for 9 years in Prague, and after the Soviet invasion of Prague, you know, there was this problem. He never went back. He moved to London, and then he remained in London, where he worked as a journalist and so on. But he did a lot of translation for 9 years, and if you are familiar with Nirmal Verma's works, you might know that, for example, Vedin, his first novel, it's not in Prague, but I mean, if you know Prague, you can find some places that are really very similar. So, I mean, it's really like not autobiographical, but I mean, it's inspired by some autobiographical events. And Prague is very much there. In 2008, Kunal Singh, who, I mean, I think he is still considered a young writer, because in India you are younger until you are, I don't know, 50? I don't know. It's like in Italy, you know, you are young forever, which is a good thing in a way. But I don't know, when do people become like, are not considered युवा लेखक any longer? अच्छा, वो तो पता नहीं, उसका खास रेसिपी है युवा रखने के लिए. No, but I don't know. There is this, you know, notion of young writers, but 35. Okay, so now he's not young any longer, but he was young at that time. Okay, and so I have written something about this book, analyzing it through the concept of minor literature, but I'm not going into this. What is interesting is that, you know, in what Kunal does, he takes the story from Prague to Assam, and he does it. I chose on purpose what Gitanjali Shri wrote on this book, because I wanted to be bad to Navinji. So it's a sad story of people trapped in one of the many collective tragedies of our time, the anti-foreigner movement of Assam, and living under the shadow of some evil every moment. A mini Mahabharata told in a calm manner. This creation of Kunal Singh, who is rich in imagination and language, which can see and show the non-existence of being and the non-existence of non-being, is unique. Now, I think this is probably a little too much, because I read the book. It's like, you know, overpraising it, but it's okay. And it's interesting because the story is taken to Assam and Hindi. That, I mean, in a moment when Hindi-speaking people are being killed because they are Hindi speakers.
इस कमेंट के बाद तो ये ट्रांसलेशन पढ़े बिना संदेहास्पद हो.
So Hindi is, we were talking about the different position of Hindi being a major language or minor language. In this novel, Hindi is a minor language. And it is used by a writer that he's writing in Hindi, but he's originally from Bengal, so he's sort of outsider if we think of the center for Hindi literary field. And the characters are really positioned in order to create something that is a minor literature. So I think this is a good example of what Rosi Braidotti describes as a nomadic identity. A nomadic identity is not like a gypsy going from one place to another, but it's this being positioned in a north-centered place, having a north-centered view, what Francesca was telling us, to go to the local small places, having not this top perspective, and having a sort of oblique perspective, which allows you to see different things. And I think, you know, because we were talking about this, about translation, about how the canon is formed. So this is an interesting reading, because you see you are traveling from Europe through a major Hindi writer's Hindi translation to a Chayanuvad, because this is, I mean, it's a totally different story, but it's the same story. There is, you know, a young couple falling in love, and it's a tragedy like Romeo and Juliet. You know, it's the same old story, but it's told in a different thing. So what were we talking about? Ramayana, and, you know, the same old story being told in different languages, in different settings. I don't know. I think, okay, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe not. But because, you know, it's still going on. You know, it's like, you know, making Valmiki Ramayana become, okay, I'm using it, become the Ramcharitmanas, or, you know, some other kind of vernacular Ramayana. And that's what Ochenashek did. He was like telling the story of Romeo and Juliet in the Nazi setting in Prague. And okay, I will stop here. So I just, wrote down for you in order that you, are not confused. What is a definition of Chayanuvad? It's like, like really something that maybe today we could call a remake. Shall we talk of intertextuality in this case, which is such a postmodern idea? But yeah. There is, yeah. So maybe this is like a postmodern translation. Can we talk about that? As usual, I don't know. I'm very. Of course, and some people may claim that we cannot have postmodernity in Hindi, or some people will think that. Okay. So this is what I wanted to tell you today, and I think we have a few minutes if you want to ask questions. And if I just, I hope I gave you some food for thought, because I don't want you to think that whatever I say is true. Maybe I said something that you don't accept. It's good. It's good. Just, fight for your ideas. So I saw a hand over there, but I cannot see it any longer. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture. There is this term you use in your lecture, creative fiction. At least I'm not very familiar with it.
Yeah, I think it's because I was probably thinking in Italian. I have to correct it. It's fiction, but in Italy we say creative writing. So I was probably, this is my brain, writing in English but thinking in Italian. So thank you for pointing out. That's why I told you that I always have to check the slides again, because I know that I read it like 30 times, but every time I find something that has to be corrected. Yeah, it's because fiction is always creative. It's creative writing. In English, you would, yeah, maybe I don't know which slide was there. It's in the definition, probably. No. Okay, I will go through it and try to find it. I don't remember it. Okay, anyway. Thank you. Oh. Why? What happened? जी
Could you give us examples from, let's say, Premchand's translation of, if I'm remembering the title of the French. Thais. Yeah. So there are certain liberties that he has taken with the translation here. That would say that there are certain liberties that happens in a literary translation that are not allowed in a non-literary translation.
What would you mean if you are translating like an instruction manual?
Yeah, let's say you are translating a work of prose. It may be a philosophical treatise, it may be a, let's say, even a manual or something like that, but the standards of what you are allowed and what you are not allowed to differ. And there are much more, there are going to be some foundation, but a literary translation gives a more creative license to a translator, if you will, than, let's say, a prose translation will.
The fact that you are allowed or not allowed, I will discuss it when I will talk about ethics in translation, because this is really very important point. Of course, when you are translating, there is this basic idea that you should be, your final product should respect the original work, like the source text and the target text should be equivalent. Well, but what do we mean by equivalent? Is it possible? Is it not possible? when a translator changes something, it might be just an error because, you don't know it. Okay, I just give you an example. Because in Italy, translators are paid very badly, and translations are often done by people who know English, but they don't know India. Because you might be a student of English language in Italy, but you have never been to India. I mean, Englishes are very many in the world. And so, I mean, Indian English, and so you are translating a work written in English by an Indian writer, and you are translating into Italian. You have no idea of what India is and so on. You have the language. You don't know exactly the context. What happened? This was a very bad translation, and I'm not blaming the translator because I know that she was paid nuts. So, I mean, you have to do it very quickly, and you don't have the time. If you're a good translator, you check what you are translating. You don't know, you check and so on, and then you make the final choice. What happened, and this is a very funny story, there is this situation where somebody's chacha decides to become a renouncant, and so he decides to, in Italian it sounded like this: he will spend the rest of his life under a banana tree. Okay, and I was figuring this poor man sitting under this tree, it's because it was a banyan tree. But a banyan tree for this lady was something very strange, and she thought it must be banana, it's banana. So the poor chacha, instead of spending the rest of his life, if you want to be a sadhu, you would probably, between a banana tree and a banyan tree, which one would you prefer? I would go for the shade. I mean, it's better a banyan tree. But this was so funny. When I read it, I was like, oh my God. But this poor lady, she didn't have any clue. And, probably she didn't even have the time to look at that. So she made this. It's because of ignorance. But in this case, it's not ignorance. It's because you want to make a point. And of course, you might say this is like taking a liberty. But what if your aim is to do this? Because the translator in this case is very much active, is very much present. There is an introduction. He's explaining his goals. He's repeating 3 or 4 times, look, अंग्रेजी ठीक से नहीं लिखते हैं. वे यूरोप में हमसे कहते हैं कि हमारा साहित्य सबसे अच्छा है, लेकिन वास्तव में देखो यूरोप में क्या क्या है, अंग्रेजी से और अच्छा है, और सबसे अच्छा फ्रांसीसी. I mean, this is a very strong point. So, I mean, of course he has to do it. Translation is never a neutral act. And I think we will come back to this because we are going to discuss, this cultural turn. I think it's tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? Yeah. So, and this is exactly where these problems come up, like to what extent can I as a translator make choices? To what extent should I respect the norms that are prescribed and so on? So I don't know if I replied to your...
Maybe we'll have more discussion on this topic.
Yeah, tomorrow and the next days.
मित्रों, आप लोग मुझे रोटी है तो मैं अभी जो केशव ने जो सवाल किया है, ये मुझे बड़ी पीड़ा होती है. बीते सारे वर्षों को एक गड्ढे में डालकर मैं अनुवाद में आया, और अनुवाद में ये सब आप लोगों में से लगभग सभी ने देखा होगा. जो सलमान खान एक सिनेमा में एक बच्ची को हिंदुस्तान से पाकिस्तान पहुंचाने जाता है, कौन सा सिनेमा है? उसमें पाकिस्तान में जब वो सलमान खान जब छोड़ के गया है तो उस बच्ची के साथ वो उसको सुबह सुबह अचानक से पता चलता है कि मैं तो मस्जिद में होंगे, लेकिन वो किरदार निभा रहा है एक हिंदू का, तो अचानक से उसे एकदम धर्मद्रोह मन में आता है, भाग के बाहर आता है और चबूतरा पर सोता है। ध्यान रखिए इन सब चीजों का जो आगे मैं कहने वाला हूं। और जब वो मौलाना साहब आते हैं, कहते हैं आओ आओ और खुदा भीतर आओ, कहा हम कह जाएंगे, हम मोहम्मदन थोड़े हैं। उस समय वो भीतर नहीं गए, लेकिन जो ही पुलिस की गाड़ी की सायरन बजी, दुम सुटका के भीतर भागा। ये जो छायानुवाद करने वाले लोग हैं, ये इसी तरह के आचरण के होते हैं कि जब जरूरत पड़ी लपक लेंगे बाढ़ में, मैं बह न जाऊं तो इस पेड़ की टहनी ही पकड़ के मैं जिंदा रह जाऊं और बीच में सारी बदतमीजियां करता रहूं और साहित्य को भ्रष्ट करता रहूं, पाठकों को दिग्भ्रांत करता रहूं, गलत दिशा दिखाता रहूं। अबे करना है यार तो या तो ट्रांसलेशन कर या खुद लिख। ये छायानुवाद क्या होता है? ऐसी ही बदतमीजी दूरदर्शन वाले करते हैं। इस धारावाहिक के सारे पात्र काल्पनिक हैं। यदि दुर्योग से मेरा निकटवर्ती मित्र है जो लिखता है, अब तो वो सीरियल निकल चुका, अकबर पर लिखा जा रहा था और एक पंक्ति घोषणा कर दी कि इसमें सारी चीजें ऐतिहासिक प्रमाण नहीं है। या और भी जगह लिखा जाता है कि यदि किसी के आचरण से इस पात्र का मेलजोल हो जाए तो उसे इत्तेफाक मात्र समझे, अपना अपमान नहीं। ऐसे ऐसे बदतमीज लोग जो अनुवाद में आते हैं, आप सभी नौजवानों से मैं बार बार इन बातों पर इसलिए इंटरप्ट करता हूं कि मैंने अपनी जिंदगी अनुवाद के नाम लिख दी है। अपने पीछे के सारे कर्मों को एक गड्ढे में डालकर इस अनुवाद में जब कोई बदतमीजी करने आता है और उल्टी सीधी हरकतें करके कहीं कहीं कुछ कुछ दे देता है, किसी पागल ने कह दिया कि अनुवाद बदतमीजी, ये क्या है, गद्दारी है। एक दूसरे पागल ने कह दिया अनुवाद हुआ वैसी पत्नी है जो खूबसूरत होगी तो विश्वसनीय नहीं, विश्वसनीय होगी तो खूबसूरत नहीं। अब सारे के सारे पागल जो हमारे समाज के शैक्षिक वर्ग जो है वो खुद ही विभ्रांत है, उनको अपना ही परिचय नहीं है कि वो ऐसी ऐसी चीजों को लेके ढोए फिरता है। एक बार किसी पागल पत्रकार ने कह दिया, कभी आज से 15 साल 20 साल पहले, कि उन्होंने बजट पेश करते हुए बजट मंत्री ने बीच में 2 बार पानी पिया। अब उसके बाद सारे के सारे बुद्धिजीवी सभी बजट पेश करने में यही गौर से देखते रहे हैं, अरे वित्त मंत्री ने इस बार 3 बार पानी पिया। ये पता नहीं हमारे देश के बुद्धिजीवियों को हो क्या गया, अपना दिमाग लगाना ही भूल चुके हैं आप सभी। मैं मानता हूं कि अनुवाद में इतनी देर से आप लोग 4 दिनों से बैठ रहे हैं, हमारे मित्र मलखान जी बैठे हैं, मेरी बात पर मुस्कुरा रहे हैं, पर मलखान जी मुझे सचमुच की पीड़ा होती है क्योंकि मैंने अपनी जिंदगी लिख दी है अनुवाद के नाम से, और इस अनुवाद में ये बदतमीजी मुझे जहां जहां होती है बहुत क्रोध आता है। तो ऐसे मित्र, ऐसे ऐसे छायानुवाद करने वालों से बचें। और उसका जो ये गोरख धंधा है जो सलमान खान ने वहां किया है, कोई सलमान खान को इस रूप में न बात पहुंचाए कि मैंने उनको गोरख धंधा करने वाला कहा है। मैं उस कैरेक्टर को जो इतने शानदार ढंग से पेश किया गया है वहां कि एक व्यक्ति भय में भागता है, जिसका आंचल पकड़ता है, एक धर्म के सहारे वहां से दूर भागता है। ये वैसे ही छायानुवादक है। छायानुवाद करना है तो तुलसीदास की करो, तुलसीदास की तरह, कृतवास की तरह, बहुत सारे सभी। अभी मैडम ने कहा कि सारे वर्नाकुलर्स ने महाभारत और रामायण का पुनर्लेखन किया है। वह अपनी अपनी भाषा का ओरिजिनल भी है और अपनी अपनी भाषा का अनुवाद भी है। ओरिजिनल इसलिए है कि वह शुद्ध अनुवाद नहीं है, और अनुवाद इसलिए है कि वह एप्रोप्रिएशन है। अपने समय के काल, परिवेश, स्थान, काल, पात्र सारी चीजों को देखकर वह उसमें एप्रोप्रिएट किया गया है, आत्मसातीकृत किया गया है। ये मुझे आप सबसे निवेदन है कि अनुवाद में इन धंधेबाजों से बचे रहने की आप सब चेष्टा करें। कौन पूछेंगे सवाल? विकास जी
चाय के लिए
सवाल करेंगे।
थैंक यू मैम। एक सवाल मैं ये पूछना चाहता था कि मैम हिंदी के 19वीं शताब्दी के और 20वीं शताब्दी की शुरुआत में जो पत्रिकाएं निकलती थी, उन पत्रिकाओं में बहुत सारे अनुवाद भी छपते थे, प्रकाशित होते थे। जैसे कि हमने आज देखा कि मतलब कि स्त्री विमर्श में, दलित विमर्श के तहत हम फिर से उन पत्रिकाओं की पड़ताल कर रहे हैं और उसमें ऐसे डिस्कोर्स को खोजने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं जो कि स्त्रियों से संबंधित है या मतलब मार्जिनाइज्ड सेक्शन से संबंधित है। क्या अनुवाद को लेकर भी, जैसे आपने हरीश द्विवेदी की, फ्रांचेस्का अश्विनी के कई जगह कोटेशंस दिए, तो क्या ऐसा कोई टूल्स है जिसके माध्यम से हम वापस जाएं और अनुवादों को कनेक्ट करके एक श्रेणी के तहत हम उनको फिर से देख सकें, उनको रियलाइज कर सकें कि उनको हम कैसे देख सकते हैं और अनुवाद का इतिहास में उनका कैसे उपयोग कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि मैं उनका रेफरेंस कहीं नहीं आ रहा, मतलब पत्रिकाओं में जैसे मैंने महावीर प्रसाद द्विवेदी जो पत्रिका निकाली उसमें हर अंक में अनुवाद छपता था। चांद के फांसी अंक में लगातार अनुवाद, चांद पत्रिका में लगातार अनुवाद छपता था। तो उन अनुवादों को हम कैसे देखें? क्या कोई रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी के तहत उनको देख सकते हैं? इसके बारे में जानना चाह सकते हैं।
Yes, I think one of the problems is that in those periodicals, the translated parts are not quoted, they are not marked. So sometimes there is the title and there is, I cannot give you exact references, but there are some books that I can, I mean, if you send me an email, I can send you the references. So about the fact that these materials were used very freely, and it's not like there was not the notion of copyright or something like that. So these were like individuals who were like reading things and they were translating what they thought it was important, and of course, I mean, they didn't put the reference, you find this at page 3 of this edition. So I don't know if you want to reconstruct what was translated by whom in which journal. I think this is really like, I mean, kam se kam ek PhD karna padega. I don't know, it's really something you should take, just find out, maybe one periodical and see, or maybe 2 or more, and see in those years how many translations were published, how many of them are recognized as translation, how many are inserted in other kind of articles, because sometimes this is what happens also, they were like discussing something and it's like, I don't know, I found this interesting passage by Honoré de Balzac and they write it down, but they don't tell you exactly where they're translating from. So that's why the fact that it happens in periodicals, I mean, if it's something like what was commissioned by the Hindustani Academy, if it's something institutional, then you can, that they are translating this and that. If there is a book, then If it's this kind of situation, it's more complicated. So, but I think it's possible to do it, but I don't know if anybody's doing it. I don't know. I know that Charu Gupta, she's okay.
She's working on periodicals in particular references
About translation.
विकास का जो सवाल था, ये 1917 से लेकर 42 तक के बीच में 19-20-25 इस समय महावीर प्रसाद द्विवेदी की पत्रिका थी सरस्वती, और महादेवी वर्मा संपादन करती थी चांद पत्रिका जी। इन दोनों पत्रिकाओं में उस दौर के वर्ल्ड लिटरेचर में जितनी भी चीजें महत्वपूर्ण होती और साहित्य के लोगों के लिए जरूरत की थी, सोशली उसका रेलेवेंस था, इंक्लूडिंग इंडिपेंडेंस मूवमेंट, तो ये विकास ने जो अभी सवाल उठाया है वो वहीं से उठाया है।
अच्छा।
पर उसमें से एक महावीर प्रसाद द्विवेदी की सारी चीजें तो छप के आ चुकी, पर उन्होंने जो एडिट किया और एडिटिंग के दौरान अपनी पत्रिका में जिन सभी ट्रांसलेशंस को प्रकाशित किया वो अभी पुस्तकाकार नहीं हुआ है। चांद पत्रिका के फारसी अंक और एक और अंक, ये दोनों बुक फॉर्म में कोई प्राइवेट पब्लिशर ले आए, पर वो बुक फॉर्म में चूंकि नहीं आई है इसलिए आप तक नहीं पहुंची है। पर ये तो सही कहा आपने, इस पर तो पीएचडी लिखनी पड़ेगी।
हाँ, मुझे मालूम है कि फ्रांचेस्का उस पर
लेकिन मैं चाहता था इसको एनालाइज करने के हमारे पास कोई रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी है क्या, जैसे कि हमने बताया ना इसके विमर्श देखने के बाद टूल से उसके तहत हम उनको एनालाइज करते हैं, उस समय रचनाओं को देखते हैं। और तो इसी तरह से क्या ट्रांसलेशन की एबिलिटी भी है कि हम उसको किसी टूल्स के तहत उसको देखें। अगर हम ट्रांसलेशन पढ़ लेंगे लेकिन उसका उसको एनालाइज कैसे करें, सीक्वेंस में कैसे रखें, ये मैं जानना चाहता हूं।
एनालाइज तो
इस तरह रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी का वहां पे उपयोग किया करें, कैसे उसको देखें।
Anuvad, to analyze translation, it depends on what kind of analysis you want to do. If you want to do like a linguistic analysis, then you will check if there is this like word by word equivalence or something like that. If you want to do a sociological analysis, there are different kind of approaches. So, I mean, it depends on what you want to do. You want to analyze those texts in order to see if, for example, they addressed special topics, like they preferred. This means that you're probably more oriented to social analysis, and then you will read it you can also do like, like a thorough analysis of, from the linguistic point of view, from the social point of view, from the cultural point of view, and maybe you can also make like a counter analysis, like, okay, from the Dalit point of view, I read this text and I see that they are all by Savarna people and they're only discussing things that are, they are only choosing to translate things that are regarding Savarna people. I don't know, I'm just making it up, but I think there is not, you don't have, I think if you do this kind of research, you don't have only one, you must be interdisciplinary, so you must adopt like a historical approach, a sociological approach. If there are people who are still alive, you might also want to like interview them, because now I don't know if you're thinking of the 20s, maybe not many of them are alive, but maybe, I don't know, somebody who has been in contact with them, you want to, I don't know. So you must be interdisciplinary. And then, well, of course, you will use the different tools.
और सोशल रेलेवेंस ही सबसे बड़ा टूल है। उसके लिए किसी विमर्श और किसी विमर्श और किसी मेथोडोलॉजी की तलाश करेंगे तो फिर वो विमर्शों के खाते में जाकर के वो कबीर में आप देशज आधुनिकता ढूंढने लग जाएंगे तो फिर कबीर आपको इररिलेवेंट लगने लगेंगे। तो इसलिए उसके लिए सोशल इशूज उस समय का देखिए और आज फिर वो कितना रेलेवेंस है उसका, ये सबसे बड़ा रेलेवेंस है। आइए आप लोग बैठिए।
I would also add that actually the notion of world literature, what was world literature then, what is now, this idea of, maybe this is also something that you have to bring into the field. So that's why, you have to get different approaches. And then when you have an idea, you will probably have, you will know at that time what is the best tool to use. But
समाचार हो गया है, धन्यवाद देके चाय बुलाइए, ये कहता है।
Global south and global north. So it is an idea that has evolved through earlier ideas, but the idea is more clearer now than it used to be.
Yeah. ठीक है, धन्यवाद। चाय लीजिए, चाय पी लीजिए।